Hey guys, it's me, MAMZYY, and in today's video I'm going to be ranking every single fight in Jojo's Part 1, Phantom Blood. A lot of you seem to like the video where I ranked every single fight in Jojo's Part 5, Golden Wind, so I've decided that I'm going to make this into an actual series. I've done Part 5, so now I'm going to do Part 1, and then I will give the other parts the same treatment. But without any further ado guys, let's get right into it. So the first fight on this list is Dio versus Dio. This is easily the worst fight on the list because not only is it really one-sided and predictable, but also it just doesn't have any good reason to exist. It's trying to establish that Dio has gotten stronger with his freezing abilities, but considering what happens later during the fight between Dio and Jonathan, you could literally just remove the Dio fight out of the story and it would not change a thing, as it serves no meaningful purpose. It's just that pointless to me. Just like Dio himself, who is probably the most pointless character to ever be introduced in all of Jojo's. But I'll save that rant for another video, so let's just move on to the next fight. So the next fight on this list is Jonathan versus Speedwagon and the Ogre Street Thugs. So this is a pretty basic and one-sided fight where not really much happens. Two of the Ogre Street Thugs attempt to attack Jonathan once. He catches one of their attacks and then one-shots them both. And then Speedwagon just has a shot at the Joestar with his weapon, which is cool, but the way it's used is just very underwhelming and Speedwagon just gets low diff. So yeah, this fight isn't really that great either, but at the very least it is slightly more enjoyable than the last fight, so yeah, I will give it that at the very least. So the next fight on this list is Jonathan versus Doobie. This is another one-sided fight, but one with a bit of creativity to it, to be fair. It starts off with Jonathan throwing a anvil at his head and then telling him that his kind don't deserve any introductions, which I find to be quite funny, to be honest, but also very cool because of the pose that he does while saying it as well. Jojo then jumps into him but is basically attacked due to his own recklessness, and as a result he's poisoned due to the attack coming from these random snakes that come out of Doobie's head. But then Jonathan gets rid of the poison with ease using Harmon and then proceeds to low diff Doobie by conducting his snakes with Harmon, who then bite Doobie and basically kill him in the process, which I think is a pretty cool way to end the fight. I just wish the fight was much longer. I think this fight had the potential to become a great one, but unfortunately due to its very short length it's just okay at best. The next fight on this list is Jonathan and Zeppeli versus Jack the Ripper. This fight has Zeppeli going up against Jack the Ripper, who is also named after the real life cultural icon that was known for being a serial killer in London back in the 1800s. But thanks to Dio, he's been turned into a zombie, and one Zeppeli quickly outmatches with ease despite how fearsome Jack appears to be at first with the many attacks that he displays on screen or on the pages if you're reading the manga. Zeppeli hits him with a really cool harmonic kick while also giving a really cool speech about courage, but then he proceeds to have Jonathan take over to finish the job without spilling a glass of wine to test Jonathan, while also helping him grow as a fighter and a Harmon user in the process as well. And the way Jonathan finishes him off is not only believable but also really cool as well. The only issue is that again this is another one-sided fight, which sucks because otherwise it would have been much higher on this list, but for what it is, it's still pretty decent. Now the next fight on this list is the boxing fight between Dio and Jonathan, technically the first ever proper fight that they've ever had. Now this is another one-sided fight that is pretty basic, mainly due to it being boxing focused, but to be fair it does have a good purpose for the plot. It does serve a purpose as Dio's overwhelming victory over Jojo forces his friends to admire him, which in turn allows Dio to manipulate them and have them turn on Jonathan. So yeah, like I mentioned, it does serve a purpose, and animation wise it looks amazing and does a great job of maintaining the art's quality quality, while the characters move very fluidly as well. So overall, it's a pretty enjoyable fight for what it is. Okay, so now we have the Dio versus Jonathan fight that took place in the mansion. So this fight basically comes off the sacrifice of Jonathan's father, who basically saves his son from the knife that Dio tried to use on Jojo originally to get his blood on the mask to use its power. Despite his dad's death and being scared at the sight of Dio's new powers, Jonathan presses on and still challenges the newborn vampire in a fight that feels very intense. There's a lot of high stakes here for Jonathan to not only beat Dio but to also come out of the fight unscathed. Jonathan can only use the tools and environment around him to help him deal with Dio, who's literally just flexing his newfound power during the fight while giving Jonathan a very hard time, but eventually Jonathan manages to put Dio down by having him stabbed by the Joestar family's guardian statue. While I do like this fight, I'm not gonna lie, there is a little bit too much plot armor that's basically given to Jonathan towards the end of the fight, because no matter what Dio does, Jonathan just conveniently manages to save himself somehow, some way, even when it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But despite my gripes with it, I still think that this is a very decent fight for what it is. So the next fight on this list is Dio versus Zeppeli and Jonathan. This fight is very short but way better than the previous ones, and on its own manages to establish very well just how much more of a threat Dio has become at this point of the story because of him being able to finally get used to all of his new powers that he proceeds to use on both Jojo and Zeppeli, who tried to put up a good fight against him with their Harmon, only to end up being absolutely clapped in the process, showing that Harmon won't be enough to stop him, which raises the stakes quite a bit. So overall, it's a pretty good fight for what it is, even if it is very short. Okay, so the next fight is Jonathan and Zeppeli versus Tarukas. This is probably the second most brutal fight in the story, as we see Tarukas force Jonathan into a fight where both of their necks are held by steel chains, and due to Zeppeli and the others being locked out of the room initially, and Tarukas having such a huge size along with his monstrous strength, he puts Jonathan at a major disadvantage until Poco manages to open the door after sneaking into the room after he has mustered up the courage to do so, which allows Zeppeli to come and aid Jonathan, but this quickly and disappointingly results in Zeppeli getting low-diffed with half of his body getting sliced in half, which then later leads to him giving the remains of his Harmon to Jonathan, which is a great scene, but I just wish Araki had Zeppeli do more during this fight. At the end of episode 6, even though there was this obvious death flag for Zeppeli, the cliffhanger still made it look like he was gonna do some really cool shit, only for that to just not be the case at all. He's essentially just a plot device in this fight to help Jonathan win, which kind of sours it quite a bit for me. Don't get me wrong, the final showdown between Jonathan and Tarukas is epic as hell, and another thing that I will praise this fight for is raising the stakes from the previous one between Jojo and Pruford. But overall, the fight is pretty good, but it's definitely not as great as I would have liked it to be. So the next fight on this list is Pruford versus Jonathan. This is a great fight. Pruford is not only a major threat that manages to bring his own unique style of combat to the fight with the utilization of his hair, but the way Jonathan manages to deal with him throughout it is very creative and cool as well. My favorite moments include him going all the way down to the bottom of the pond to get air from underneath the rocks, to him using his Harmon kick to conduct Harmon energy into Pruford's sword to save himself, and finally the sunlight yellow overdrive that would soon follow, where it basically has Jonathan doing a aura barrage before that was even a thing. This fight just has a lot of great moments to it, and also the heartfelt moment at the end with Pruford and Jojo was great too. But yeah, like I said, this fight is really really great. Next fight on this list is Jonathan versus Dio and Wang Chan. So this is a fight that has a very bittersweet end to it. It's the true final showdown between Dio and Jonathan, with Dio also being assisted by Wang Chan this time. It may not be better than the fight that came before it, but it still does a great job of solidifying the end of Jonathan and Dio's character arcs in this story, while still continuing the theme of their fates being inseparable and intertwined with one another. Jonathan is forced to face Dio and Wang Chan, who both crash on his honeymoon to America. He tries to stop the evil vampires from trying to take his head, while also trying to save Arena as well, but sadly this results in Jonathan taking major injuries that slowly kill him over time. He manages to kill Wang Chan in a really cool fashion, but only manages to subdue Dio, who pretty much wins the fight and survives in the end, which is indicated by part 3. Originally he was supposed to go down with Jonathan, but Araki changed this plot point for the sake of giving part 3 a main villain. I'm pretty sure most of you already know the story about this already, but yeah, regardless, it's a great fight for what it is. It always manages to get me a bit emotional just seeing Jonathan fight for his life, trying to save his wife while trying to beat Dio, only to just end up dying while holding Dio, or his head I should say, in his arms, accepting that despite how much hell he's put him through, he still has love for his brother. It's a tragic but also very cool and memorable moment too, because even though Jonathan died in such a brutal way, he still went out on his shield like a gentleman, protecting the one that he loved the most. So the next fight on this list is Jonathan versus Dio, the first fight that they had in the mansion as teenagers. For me, this fight is phenomenal for multiple reasons. Firstly, because of how satisfying it was to see Jonathan finally beat the crap out of Dio after the hell that he put him through in this episode, or chapters in the manga's case. But yeah, the first time I ever watched this fight, I hated seeing Jonathan let Dio just walk all over him after his dad invited Dio into their home, to the point where I almost dropped the series just off this first episode alone. I'm not joking, this was like 10 years ago and I was like 17 at the time. But yeah, basically seeing Jonathan finally get his get back, just seeing him finally stand up to Dio was a surprise, and seeing him beat Dio was an even bigger surprise as well, but it was still satisfying nonetheless, especially after what Dio did to Arena, which was the last straw by the way. But yeah, I just loved seeing Jonathan stand up to Dio, to the point where Dio was finally forced to not only back off Jonathan but also respect him as well. But I'm also happy that this fight did not make Dio give up on his ambitions, which would basically progress the story forward. But yeah, for me this fight was and still is phenomenal and just great overall, but not great enough to be number 1. So the number 1 fight on this list is Jonathan versus Dio in Dio's mansion. This is the best fight on this list, as it's Jonathan and Dio fighting at their absolute best. No sneak attacks, just a fair fight to the death between brothers. I love how the two try and one up each other in this fight, but also just how personal it feels as well. You can really tell that the dynamic between the two has been building up towards this battle within Dio's mansion, where they can finally settle their differences once and for all. Yeah, the fight after this is the true final showdown between the two, but this feels more like a proper showdown between them. Plus there's no interference from Wang Chan or anyone else between Dio and Jonathan in this fight, while Dio's powers and how he uses them aren't really anything interesting to speak of. Jonathan himself uses a lot of creative and unique ways to deal with those said abilities by basically making use of his Harmon. Firstly, by infusing his Harmon into Bluford's sword to avoid contact with Dio's ice attack, and then later in the fight he proceeds to use his Harmon to combine the fire that is basically surrounding him when he fights Dio. He infuses the fire with his Harmon to do this really epic final attack at the end. In the anime, the art and animation is also the best it's ever been in a fight for part 1, and you can really tell that DP put a lot of effort and more resources into this fight compared to the other ones on this list, and rightfully so, because even in the manga this fight is phenomenal. So yeah, overall it's a great fight, and it's also the best fight in JoJo's Part 1. So overall, those are the fights of JoJo's Part 1 ranked. What do you guys think? What do you guys think are the best fights in JoJo's Part 1? Be sure to leave your rankings in the comment section below. If you liked or enjoyed this video, then please be sure to hit that like button. Also subscribe for more JoJo and other anime and manga related content. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is your boy MAMZYY signing out. Take care and peace.